Stress is at an all-time high for both kids and adults. And so we're talking about tamping down moodiness and anger in kids. And, before I get started, I want to say that being the mother of teenagers, that some level of moodiness and anger is absolutely normal amongst kids of all ages. They all go through it. And it becomes a clinical issue when it interferes with their life in some way, shape, or form, right? So it's interfering with school, it's interfering with relationships, maybe relationships with you or their siblings. Your child gets distressed a lot. Then we have ourselves a clinical problem. And it's always a great idea to get help. If you're not part of our Natural Parenting Solutions group, hop over to drroseanne.com/group and join our free Facebook group where we talk about natural solutions like we're going to talk about today for mental health. And we talk about our magnesium, which we just launched. You can go to drroseanne.com/magnesium. Super proud of our multi-mag brain formula, which, has science-backed forms of magnesium designed to calm the brain. And we all need that. So anyway, let's talk about why some kids are so angry. So sometimes they have clinical issues like ADHD. Sometimes they have medical issues like PANS and PANDAS or other issues that affect their brain and body. Maybe they're neurodivergent and they are more sensitive to their environment. There's a lot of reasons that could be some clinical problem interfering with their mental health and their ability to have stress tolerance, right? Because it's all about stress tolerance. If we don't have stress tolerance, everything is going to get on our nerves, right? And, if your glass half empty, it's going to be more of a problem, right? So that is a definite possibility. If you suspect if your child has had this issue for a long time, this is when you really want to get professional help. Sometimes our kids are angry and moody because there's stress at home. Maybe there's a lot of conflict. Maybe something I see all the time is two different parenting styles or opposite sides of the spectrum on parenting. And that leads to a lot of conflict at home. And when we have conflict at home, what happens? Our kids are the ones that feel it, right? So when we have that, obviously we want to try to join as parents. Easier said than done. Usually one of the parents thinks the kid is doing it on purpose. I promise you, when you have a really cranky and moody kid, nobody wants to be cranky and moody. They're not doing this on purpose. It's often a real issue with not understanding what to do. And I think that's really surprising because your child may be capable in school or have an area that they're really great in. And you're just like, well, why is this so hard for them? Well, look around. I mean, if you work, you probably see people who are poor at managing stress. And for some people, it's a temperament issue. For some people, it could be there's a clinical issue. It could be a lot of things. So think about that and think about what you can do at home, right? We're going to talk about strategies. Life stressors. Maybe there's bullying. Maybe it's the wrong educational setting. Maybe your child's not getting enough sleep. Maybe they're really bad eaters and they're just not getting proper nutrition, which is a lot of kids are really lousy eaters. I always crack up when parents tell me their kids are good eaters and they're like, well, they have broccoli. And I'm like, that's it? So you got to power up your brain. I'm not here to make you feel bad. I'm here to get you to think a little bit different. So low frustration tolerance, lack of coping skills, right? This is really the nexus of why some kids really struggle with anger and irritation, right? So some kids have clinical issues which make them more sensitive. Maybe they have sensory processing disorder. There's a whole list of clinical issues. Maybe you have rejection sensitive dysphoria, right? Which is basically you're more sensitive to perceived or real criticism. So but ultimately, it's about poor coping skills, right? I mentioned people at work, and you always know that person who's like, wow, they always fly off the handle or easily irritated. I was talking to somebody this morning about somebody in my family, and I was like, oh, I don't want to go over there and see them because they're always so irritated. Yeah, a relative of mine. blood relative, no less. So, and what is it? It's somebody who spent their, whole life getting whatever they wanted. And the moment they don't get what they want, they get really irritated. And that is how they approach things in life. So it now, yes, I know they're an adult and yes, they should know better. And trust me, every day, there are people who, we all encounter that don't have those skills. It starts when you are a kid. It's never too late to learn healthy coping skills. We inherit a lot of these from our parents. So let's talk about strategies for moodiness and anger, because that's really, what you're here. And that's really what I do every day. And we all need strategy. I have a child who's more sensitive, easily angered. And hello, what do I got to do? I got to share my calm. So you've heard me talk about this. Sharing your calm is co-regulation. So how we are physically acting, our body language, is really what our kids see. I recently had a mom, and their child did neurofeedback and had like really, truly an unbelievable response. He was an angry kid, and she said, "Wow, he's so much less angry. He approaches things even when he is angry. His recovery is much better. He's really working towards all those steps. They're doing parenting work." But she said, "You know what I really notice? I noticed that when your parents don't got it together, they don't have it together." And really, she said, was a big highlight on her husband's unresolved issues and how angry he is. And she said that he no longer says irritating things, but his body language looks like he's bottle corked. And I was like, I'm going to be sharing that with everybody because that's powerful. And I think that's important. And yeah, absolutely had a rough history growing up as as a child. And now he's a parent. So we got to do our inner work, people. We can't just be like, my kid lives in a nice house, goes to a good school. They should just be regulated and calm. Well, what are you doing to support that? And I know you're doing a lot, but this is also to just say, we've got to do this. So calming the brain. There are lots of ways to calm the brain. I'm going to say magnesium, I'm going to say PEMF and neurofeedback and meditation and yoga. You have to calm your brain. You have to support your child's brain in being calm. When you have an angry and moody kid who this is their norm, this is their baseline. This isn't some situation. If your kid overnight becomes moody and dysregulated, please go and get them checked for infectious disease like tick-borne illness. They probably have PANS or PANDAS. If there isn't some immediate stressor or they haven't had a traumatic event, you want to really look what's going on. But if your child, their baseline is irritation and anger, and you know what I'm talking about if you got one of those kids. Whenever I say, "Oh, were they always like this?" I'm either going to get the, "No, I don't know what happened," or I get, "They came out like that, Dr. Brown." I'm like, well, I get it. Some kids, that glass half empty, and it's a bit of a struggle. Calming the brain is really important. One of my favorite tips to help kids regulate of all ages and adults too is sensory support. It's something we don't talk enough about. And two of my best friends are OTs, and Miss Debbie and Miss Becky. If you're listening, Becky usually listens. And, there's just so much we can do to calm in a natural way, right? And sensory support, why does it help so much? Well, when you are stressed, and all of us have experienced it, it's that sensation. I've got the big lights on right now and it's cold. And I'm like, wow, I feel this, right? So you have this sensitivity and your body is modulating in it. But when you are struggling or you experience sensory integration disorder or a temporary sensory issue, those simple things dysregulate the nervous system so that you're reactive to everything in your environment. So if we can calm our nervous system through sensory support, we're less irritated, we're less angry, we're less, as I like to call, viperish. And what does that look like? It could be a weighted blanket. It could be rolling on the ground. It could be going on a swing. Each child or individual has their own sensory support, right? I love taking baths pretty much most nights. Now, part of it is the warmth and, of course, the magnesium that I put in there. But it's also the deep pressure that it gives you in all of your joints and helps to calm you. So look for sensory supports. Big hugs are sensory supports, crab walks. There's so many ways. There's great strategies. So when we have an angry and irritated, dysregulated child, we need to show them what we want them to do. You're going to hear me. I'm a behaviorist. We got to reinforce and shape desired behaviors. We're not going to go, you didn't make your bed. You're instead going to say, I see you need to make your bed. Come on, let's do it together, right? I know you can't do that every day because you got to run and you got to do this. What if your kid did, a meza job of making the bed? Well, you want to reinforce it and say, I see you did that, right? And that's where that consistency comes in. I think this is the one that's the hardest for all of us, like whether it's yourself going to the gym or getting to bed on a certain time. Consistency is what builds the desired behaviors. And kids that are dysregulated, once your autonomic nervous system goes into a sympathetic dominant state, learning is either impossible or very hard. And so you're just they're not going to hear you. You know what I'm talking about. If your kid is easily angered and they go into the red a lot, they're not hearing you. So don't fact fight. People do this all the time with me, right? I had a very dysregulated couple recently, and they wanted to fact fight with me, and I was like, "This is Dr. Roseanne. I don't do that." and fact fighting means that you're really getting into it with your kid, and you're arguing over facts, right? Well, you said you'd make your bed by 7, and again, that doesn't mean you never talk to your kid, you never hold them accountable. But if you're constantly in this fact fighting, remember, dysregulated kids, they're not perceiving things in the same way. Big conversations need to happen when your child is regulated. I understand if you have a kid who's dysregulated all the time, when is that going to happen? Well, if you're using some strategies like sharing your own calm, getting sensory support, using supplements, you're doing things, you're doing neurofeedback, maybe that nervous system is giving you some windows of time, because those things do work in order to build up those skills. But fact fighting helps nobody. And boy, does it leave you walking away feeling angry. And then, of course, like shameful that you're doing that later, right? And your kid's not going to understand. So you have to pick your battles, right? What are the most important things? And I like to have conversations with my own kids. What are the most important things that for me, right? And when my kids were younger, it was always like safety first. So I was like, if mom yells and we're out, I'm usually something is a concern, like a safety. And the kids knew, like, oh, because, I use a lot of humor when I parent. And I find that to be the most helpful thing. And it works with, the Hodge family, right? Fits in. I like to role play, like, oh, what would that look like? Even with teenagers, I say, what does that look like when you see that? I don't know. Oh, okay, well, let's think about that. And, kind of go back and forth. When it's really younger, when they're much younger, you can do things like social stories. And I love social stories because you can pretend it's somebody else. And usually kids, especially kids with clinical issues, they may not connect that you're talking in this story about Amy when it's Joey, and it's the same exact problem. And they'll listen, because why does that happen? Why is it beneficial? Because people will put their defenses up. And, role playing is really a lifeline for kids that are too dysregulated and ashamed of their behaviors to ask for help. And again, we assumed an IQ is just a number. And so many parents get real hung up in an IQ. These are skills. These are skills that can be taught. They can be learned. So make sure that you are, thinking about what skills can I build. And at the same time, you've got to really calm that nervous system. When you have an angry kid, they sort of become, the whole family sort of moves around this angry kid. And it's really a challenge because they need support. They need TLC, but they also can create a lot of disruption. They can create friction. You know, I recently had somebody fly out for our brain behavior reset program. And if you're interested, you can go to drroseanne.com/help to get a solution matcher and see if you're a good fit for our program. And we guide you into different ways. And, you know, they were so concerned about all the kids in the family, as they should be, because they had this one super angry kid. And of course, you know, she had PANS, and you know, which meant that her body was dealing with infections and actually toxins, mold, and was dysregulated. And this was a newer behavior. This wasn't something they had seen. And you know, they have you know, two other kids at home, and they didn't know how to handle it, and they became really concerned, for sure. But you know, what they did is they tightened up their parenting strategies. They worked on the calm, and they stopped getting into these fights with her. And it wasn't easy, as you know, you really have to learn how to regulate. If you're interested in learning more about strategies, we're going to be talking in a webinar, a longer webinar, just from dysregulated to calm, strategies for unfocused, anxious, and moody kids. You go to drroseanne.com/moody kids. Whenever you're seeing this or listening this is a webinar that's free. It will be up and you can access it. It's just going to give me more time to go into some of the strategies to better support, because I do feel that, you know, whether your kid is unfocused or it has anxiety or mood issues, we are moving towards a more angry society in general. And that's the message that's going to kids. And some kids are wired that way. And we just have to meet our kids where they're at. It is not easy. But when you focus on calming the brain, your brain, their brain, and really, really dive into what are those missing skills? How can I teach them? How can I support them? How can I reinforce them so that they can learn? That is when you are able to move that dial and get everybody out of that whole sort of web that you feel so stuck in. So I hope this was an empowering discussion for you and you had an aha moment. Pick one place, start there, and always, always work on sharing your own calm.